Welcome to Be Techly Learning. Step into today's live learning session from Copilot to agents governing the AI workforce, part of our Microsoft 365 Community Conference sponsor webinar series. For the next 20 minutes, we're bringing today's learning session directly to our social channels, sharing actionable insights and practical strategies you can start applying right away. Afterward, the full learning experience, including live Q&A, continues exclusively in the BTechly Learning Center. Follow the link in the comments to join us and be part of the conversation. Now for the exciting part, let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Einig from Rencore. I'm the CEO and founder of Rencore. MVP alumni. I've been 10 years Microsoft MVP and have been in the Microsoft space for more years than I can count, probably way much more than 20 years. I'm going to talk about the changing ecosystem from just having copilots, generative AI, to actually moving to agents and how you are governing that AI workforce. Just to give you a little bit of an insight, Rencore is a software vendor. We are offering a SaaS solution to help organizations and large enterprises to govern their Microsoft 365 environment. All right, so let's dive into it right away. So as I mentioned, things are changing and they are changing pretty fast. So you're probably aware if you read a little bit on LinkedIn or other social media channels, it's just an enormous pace this whole AI world is developing over the last couple of years. And that, of course, that is really, hard also for organizations to keep up with all of that and all the risks that are involved with it. So in this session, I will run you a little bit through what is actually happening, the shift or what in the AI world and what it actually means for you as an enterprise and how to manage that problem or how that problem actually looks like. And there are two failure modes that you really have to be aware of and cannot really deal with one alone. Then I'll explain a little bit where that control lives eventually, and I give you also a brief live demo of our platform that helps enterprises to manage their Microsoft 365 environment. All right, so let's dive in right away. So there's that shift. Well, these agents are already live. You already have those agents everywhere. And to be frank, Microsoft is also trying to shove down new agents our throats. Everywhere they are creating new possibilities for end users to create more agents. And also everything is an agent. There's Agent Builder, there are Copilot Studio agents, there are SharePoint agents, there are Teams Toolkit agents. It's really, really confusing. But and then, of course, on top of that, outside of the Microsoft world, if you're not just sold on Microsoft 365, but maybe also use other platforms, you will have more agents coming there. And although they are live, well, the controls are not. And Gartner gives us some insights here. So according to Gartner survey from end of last year, 72% of the respondents mentioned that they are already piloting or running M365 Copilot. And I think this is by far more now. So I think, at least I believe, there are very few organizations that are not trying any kind of generative AI, let it be Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT or other platforms that are out there. But 55% of those respondents agree that it significantly improve the value proposition of Copilot. But on the other hand, 70% of those organizations are worried about the uncontrolled costs and agent sprawl. And we saw that with the costs in particular beginning of this month. So 4 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, Microsoft announced, for example, that Copilot Cowork, which was previously included in the Copilot per user per month subscription suddenly requires on top pay-per-use costs. And they only gave about 2 to 3 weeks notice to the enterprises who have been trying that out. And that is, of course, then suddenly changing quite a lot for those enterprises who have been planning with fixed per user costs, and suddenly end users have adopted it, and the bill is increasing. So there are a lot of risks involved there. And then, of course, also the models are changing behind of that. The integrations are changing. So it's really hard to stay in control of all that these agents that are created. And that's even another problem. Well, we have now agent sprawl. So people trying things out, they build agents for whatever business reasons they have, but maybe it doesn't deliver on the value. Maybe it was only meant for a short time, and rarely agents are cleaned up afterwards. So yeah, Copilot Studio, SharePoint agents, Power Platform agents, Agents 365, all of that is deployed today and accesses data, triggers workflows, makes decisions. But most of the organization don't even know what they have. They don't even see them or control them. So what has changed eventually? We started with Copilot with generative AI, and that was still relatively simple. So you're opening up Copilot, you chat with it, it has access to your data. It's basically your assistant with what you're working. And now then the next step was, okay, we got automated agents that somebody is building. So somebody builds a purpose-built agent for a select group of people or for the entire organization, but it still acts very much like generative AI. So it's just maybe limited on scope, what it does, what data it accesses, how it processes the data, what purposes it has, compared to the more generic Copilot. Well, and now we are shifting towards more that autonomous AI workforce. So agents that maybe talk to other agents, agents that run autonomously or are triggered by events that are happening that are not necessarily initiated by an end user, but maybe by an email that is coming in, or by a state changing in your CRM system, or plenty of different triggers that can happen. And that suddenly brings the entire system, or creates a complexity for that entire system that is extremely hard to oversee and also manage. So governance has to move at that same pace as the whole agent ecosystem is evolving, and it's continuously evolve. And the control model that might have worked for Copilot before, only letting it access maybe certain data, locking it down, maybe only using Copilot Chat, Copilot Web, that does not survive anymore on that autonomous agent estate. So things have to change. And I think there is some kind of mental shift necessary. So agents are somehow digital workers. And I think if you compare that a little bit, so if you are a human employee, well, you have access to systems, to data within your organization, in Microsoft or anywhere else. You produce business output, but you also have an onboarding process. So you start your job, there's a role description where you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You get onboarding, you get trainings, you get clearly told what to do and what not to do, how to behave, who to report to, and so on. You have performance reviews, and of course, also some kind of lifecycle management. Sounds not really human resource like, but eventually throughout your journey within an organization, well, you might change roles, you might get promoted, you might get a salary raise, you might maybe also decide to leave the company again, or maybe are laid off. So there is a life cycle behind all that. So it revokes access, it changes access, and so on, what you are allowed to do, what your role description is. So if we look on the other side on the agent, well, the agent, of course, also has access to systems and data, and it also produces business output. But there is no clear onboarding process for an agent. So people are spinning up agents left and right. And Agent Builder, for example, it's just so easy to build something. And it's also part of the selling point, that it's so easy to build these things up. So These agents are just there. Somebody created them, nobody knows about it, and there's no really onboarding process. Also, there's no performance review. So does that agent really do what it was supposed to be doing? Is the ROI there? Is the value there that was expected when it was created? And that's often also the problem, because there was never an expectation met when the agent was defined when the agent was created. So people are just playing around, building agents, sharing it with others. Others are using them. Maybe it gets shared with more and more people, and the exposure of that agent dramatically increases. So there are no real performance reviews where somebody says, okay, do we still need this? Are these costs that it produces actually worth it for the outcome that we deliver, and so on? This is currently not established in most of the organizations. Um, and then there's also no life cycle management. So really identifying that an agent maybe that is no longer used is automatically decommissioned, or that there is somebody who gets asked and has to give an approval if that agent still needs to be remain. So because there is no standardized life cycle management, those agents just stay behind, and it will grow and grow and grow in your organization. Similar like what we have with data, with teams, with apps, with Power Automate flows. So without proper lifecycle management, you will get eventually sprawl. So yeah, you would never let an employee access all your data with no oversight. You have clear rules who can access which data. But why are you letting agents do it? So Gartner again says, no, actually that's one of our surveys, that data security and governance is the top challenge organizations face when deploying AI across the digital workplace. Actually, Gartner is confirming the same. They just recently had a report about that. And if you go to a Gartner event, for example, or listen to Gartner content, then you will see in anything around the AI, you will see data security and governance very high on the list. So there's right now barely a single content piece there that does not mention governance and security around AI. Yeah, and then of course, I mentioned before, so there are two failure modes. So one of them is what we just described, that agent governance gap. So the majority of the organizations currently don't think they have the controls in place to manage those agents, because there's no full agent inventory. Microsoft tries to address that now with Agent 365, but we'll get to that a little later. There's an unclear ownership. So even if you know there are agents, this doesn't mean that you know who owns them, who owns the business outcome, who owns the costs behind of it, who owns the risk also. There are no life cycle rules. Also with Agent 365, there's no real life cycle that is managed. There's no clear visibility in costs, and there's no enforcement of policies across those agents in the different places where they are exposed. So eventually, that is quite a familiar pattern. For those of you who have been in the Microsoft world for a while, you probably recall, especially in the time when the pandemic hit and everyone rushed into the cloud, particularly here in Europe, where we were a little bit behind the curve, and especially in Germany, where I'm from, where enterprises very much cherish their on-premises infrastructure and fought against the cloud. Suddenly were forced to move into the cloud in order to make their workforce even able to continue working during the pandemic when everyone was working from home. And that resulted, of course, that a lot of those rollouts happened very quickly without a plan and without any controls, which resulted in team sprawl. So lots of teams created, lots of teams abandoned, orphaned, people leave and the teams stay behind. Power Automate, so flows at the top hype of no code, low code with Power App and Power Automate. People have been creating apps and flows everywhere. And well, now with white coding, suddenly everyone moves to the next shiny object, and those flows still remain behind. Guest access also is sprawling. So more and more people collaborate across the boundaries. Microsoft 365 makes it very easy to share files with others. And who's revoking that access at some point. And also SharePoint sites. SharePoint site sprawl is as old as SharePoint, so that always has been there. And the thing is, this sprawl can never be prevented because the organizations live, they work, they start projects, they have their collaboration space, the projects end, and at some point the data just remains behind, or the workspace remains behind, and similar with flows. And we have exactly the same thing now um, with the agents. The only difference is that they are now acting autonomously. So that agent sprawl is across tenants. The shadow agents accessing the sensitive data, so you don't even know maybe where an agent runs that somebody has authenticated to your Microsoft 365 environment. And there are orphaned agents, so nobody cleans them up, decommissions them. If an employee leaves the company who's created an agent, so do you know, does it still run? Is it still used? Who owns it? Who owns the costs behind of that? Is the risk exposure somehow changing? So you're basically flying blind here with something that acts autonomously. And then, of course, these uncontrolled pay-as-you-go costs, as we mentioned before. So when teams sprawled, the collaboration got messy, yeah, but you could somehow live with the mess. When the agents sprawl, then they make decisions and access data on your behalf. So they can really break things and expose data, maybe also to people who shouldn't have access to it. So the recommendation uh, from me is govern agents like you're managing people. Have an inventory which kind of relates to an employee directory. You have your org chart, right? You know who reports to whom and where the people are located. And so you need something like that for the agents as well. Kind of a line manager analogy. So somebody needs to own it, and that's not necessarily the person who created it. Somebody or some entity within the organization needs to be the owner of the agent. You need to have lifecycle management and onboarding, offboarding process to really identify agents that are no longer used, to retire them, but also on the other hand, who can create agents, under which circumstances can they be created. So you should consider that, of course, as well. And then, of course, these performance reviews. So who is using it? What risk exposure do we have? What cost do they have? And risk, I think, is in particular an important part. So maybe today someone is creating an agent that accesses, for example, a SharePoint site and is published to a team, and then the people in the team can interact with that agent. But throughout the life cycle, maybe more people are added to the team and suddenly the exposure increases unknowingly, or maybe in the SharePoint site that is used as a data source, some more data is added and might be maybe not meant for the target audience where the agent is published to, but these things are handled maybe disconnected from each other. Somebody manages the content, somebody consumes the agent, somebody else is maybe managing access to that team, and suddenly the risk exposure throughout that life cycle is changing, and worst case, getting worse, obviously. Then there is the second failure mode. So I mentioned there are two. So it's not just about the agent and the AI in general, it's also about the data. So if you have bad data that goes into the agent, you will also have wrong decisions that are coming out of it. So AI does not fix your bad data, AI amplifies your bad data. And that's quite different to the good old times when enterprise search was all the hype. It was the same problem, bad data, wrong decisions out or wrong results. And you could somehow manage to clean up your search index and optimize based on age and so on. But with AI, you rarely know where the data comes from. Is it from the attachment that is in, or from the file that is somewhere in the SharePoint library, or maybe a copy of that file that is in your email inbox, or maybe a third version of that file that is somewhere on your OneDrive? You don't really know, and you don't really care either. So when you're working with those agents and also Copilot, let's be honest, nobody really checks the sources in detail. You're just happy that you got your response and you just roll with it. And that, of course, results in then an amplification of the garbage that you have already in your existing data storage, SharePoint, OneDrive, email, Teams, and so on. So your data gets through the agent and eventually generates output that leads to wrong decisions, maybe data leaks, and also makes users lose trust in the AI that you're using when they figure out, oh, this was actually not relevant. So the term that is used for this kind of data, that is ROT, so redundant, outdated, and trivial data. I love such acronyms. So basically, redundant data is data that might still be valid, but yeah, maybe has been uh, in so many different places that it's really hard to know which one is the right one. Then outdated, of course, obviously all the data is aging. So only because something was decided a year ago, it might no longer be valid for the future. But how does Copilot or the agent know how relevant that data is apart from the timestamp, but it still wants to answer the question? And that's also showing that kind of problem that you have. Even if you do that one-time spring clean and clean everything up and take away permissions and archive your SharePoint sites and so on, well, you continue to work and time moves on, then things become outdated again. So the problem is constantly re-emerging. Yeah, and then of course, last but not least, also, well, the question is, are you audit ready on that? So with stale content and unclear permissions, that creates regulatory exposure for you. So when auditors will ask you, and as in Europe, we have, for example, the EU AI Act that is rolled out. When regulators or auditors ask you, okay, which AI is accessing the data? Where is the data processed? Is it in your jurisdiction or wherever? Do you have full control of the data? Where is it exposed? You will need a defensible answer. Otherwise, you are exposed eventually and might lose some traction in your audit when you're getting audited, or might not meet the requirements. So eventually, what all that means, there are two controls that need to work together. So one of them is agent governance, so getting the visual visibility into all the agents and have the clear ownership and so on. And the other one is data governance, so reducing that raw content, fix the oversharing, improve the content quality, and. So I think also the way, for example, Microsoft is approaching it with Agent 365, it's primarily a nice interface on top of existing features like Purview and Defender and Entra and so on. It's primarily focused on the inventory part. So it gives you visibility in the agents, but it does not give you the ownership clearly. It does not help you with the lifecycle management. It has only very limited policy enforcement, or at least only policies that you can check. And also costs, while Microsoft's incentive is not necessarily to make it very clear what costs how much and who owns those costs, because, well, eventually they want to earn money with it. So everything is very opaque at the moment to really find out where the costs are and who they are um, assigned to within the organization. Then on the other hand, the data governance part, that is basically what Microsoft is not really focusing on. So reducing that rot content, fixing the oversharing, improving that content quality, enforcing the data lifecycle, and also that permission hygiene. There are various parts in different places of Microsoft 365, but it's not really a coherent story that brings these things together. All right. So that window to get this right is closing. Everything is moving so fast. So the first thing you really need is that visibility to really know what you have. Then you need that ownership. So who's actually owning all of that? Then you need to clean that up. And as I said, this is a recurring process. This is not just, oh, we are now ready for AI. And if we don't continuously eliminate that rot, then that makes the AI unreliable and risky. Yeah, and then you need only then you can scale that AI in your workplace. I'm a CEO myself, and of course, I'm also pushing my team. Okay, we need to adopt AI, and we need to find processes that we can optimize and so on. I think there's probably no CEO or C level in the world right now who is not having AI adoption somewhere on the top of their priorities. So, but in order to make that work, you need to have things in place to actually allow you to roll that out at scale and not just with prototypes and POCs. So organizations that skip those steps and are maybe not taking care of that visibility once they start rolling that out broader to the organization, they are the ones eventually explaining those incidents to the board. So Microsoft 365 is your control point. So in the center, is Microsoft 365. It has already these access controls and permissions. It has the ability for cost control and license optimization. Has compliance regulation, audit trails with purview. You have this data somewhere, and it gives you that innovation to enable AI safely and scale fast. But yeah, if you lose control at that place, you lose control basically everywhere. So this is where governance succeeds or fails in most of the organization. As you can imagine, as a governance software vendor, we have these conversations quite a lot at the moment with a lot of organizations. I think with if I look back in our own history, the pandemic certainly was a driver for the need of governance, but it was still at the beginning of the pandemic, it was still more of a tomorrow's problem. So there was no real urgency in the organizations where they said, like, yeah, okay, yes, we need to implement policies and we somehow manage our sharing and so on. And then maybe the last, 2 years, or let's say 24, 25, maybe 23, 24, a lot of organizations woke up and said, oh, oversharing, this is a big problem for us. Suddenly we don't know who has access to the data. And then governance and governance tooling, automating that process became really, really interesting. And now with AI, this is now off the charts. Everyone is really fearing that the AI is suddenly exposing all that crap that hasn't been managed and maintained over the last years or decades. The urgency is suddenly dramatically increasing in the organizations. Um, and I think you can all agree, well, manual governance is already failing, so you cannot do that manually. At the pace that organizations or end users are collaborating, and at the pace these innovations are rolled out and agents are growing, is absolute impossible. So you cannot just have policy documents that nobody reads or follows or do that manual review. Maybe if you're a small organization with 50 or 100 people, that is maybe still feasible to do that. But as soon as uh, the number of employees goes into the thousands or tens of thousands, and this is a fight against windmills. So you cannot do that manually. So the only way that this scales is that you have a continuous automated inventory and control. You have policy-driven enforcement, so that inventory gets updated continuously. Policies identify the violations that you have in your inventory, and then it's enforcing them also automatically so that you more focus on the policies in the playbooks, how to resolve the policy violations instead of trying to understand what's going on. So, and one important part to make that scale is this is not an IT problem alone. This needs to be handled by the entire organization. So you need to delegate ownership with real accountability to your business, to the business users who create that mess, who share those agents, who create them, who share the files, who store that stuff. They need to be also in charge to clean things up and adhere to the policies that you're setting up in your organization. And I think that is, in particular, the key for successfully rolling out governance. Governance is not a problem that is ever solved in the organization, to be honest. You will not be able to just say, oh, now we're done, because it's just constantly re-emerging. So it has to be a continuous process. And every week that you delay systemizing governance, that the cost of the remediation will eventually double. So it just becomes more costly to solve it. It's quite similar like in software development. The later you find a bug, the more costly it will become to fix it, because you already, maybe the bug hit already the customer, and the customer is maybe upset and churns. Then the cost is not just the fixing the bug, and maybe testing, and it's also actually lost business. And it's quite similar with governance. The longer you wait, the more costly it will become eventually. And actually implementing proper governance can actually save you costs. So it eventually might pay for itself. So all that said, I want to introduce a little bit, very briefly, what Rencore is all about. The Rencore platform is a governance operating system for Microsoft, and it focuses on three areas. One of them is the digital workplace, so Microsoft 365, which includes Team, SharePoint, OneDrive, Engage, Exchange, Planner, and Entra, and Purview, and a couple of other services. And that's basically the data part, like where people collaborate, where they create data, upload files, store their loop components, manage their plans, share emails, and so on. So this is your digital workplace. This is the data that is consumed by the AI. Then the second part that Rencore Governance is covering are the AI agents. So you see already here Copilot, Copilot Studio, SharePoint agents, Microsoft Foundry, Azure as the basis of many of these things, and also Agent 365, which can be used also as a conduit to retrieve things that are currently not available through standard Microsoft APIs. And last, everything around apps, automation, and BI. So Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, Fabric, Dataverse. That's the third column of Rencore Governance. And eventually, what Rencore Governance delivers or addresses is one of them. On the one hand, cloud management. So it creates that inventory of all those services, helps you to manage those services in a single central place. So it gives that single pane of glass. It provides you the ability to report and generate insights on it. Talent segmentation, also, if you're a very large organization, allows you to delegate access and management to certain subsidiaries or country organizations. So really delegate also the tenant management, which Microsoft does not allow to do out of the box. Then we have the cloud governance part. So the core part, obviously, allows you to create policies and monitor those policies, to enforce lifecycle management, run automations on your data and those objects, helps you to prevent bad things from happening by helping you to standardize the provisioning process of new resources. So instead of everyone creating a team or an agent or a plan or whatever, just randomly with the out-of-the-box capabilities of Microsoft 365, you can guide them through a standardized provisioning process that you have in control, where you can say what properties might need to be set, which are maybe predefined, for example, visibility, also maybe an approval process, maybe also triggering processes in other systems. And the decluttering, cleaning things up, the automation of governance, I mentioned that. And one important part, the end user self-service. So I mentioned before, governance does not scale if it's just the job of IT. This is really impossible. So it needs to run through the end users, and the end users need to be involved. You don't need to call it governance for the end users. Governance is a rather unsexy term, so I would not really go around and advertise, you're all going to govern now your data. But nevertheless, it's important that end users are involved in the entire process and are doing those tasks, as they are the only ones who have the ability to also decide, should that person still have access to that resource? Should that data maybe be archived or deleted, and so on? You, from an IT perspective, are not able to do that. And everything around cloud risk and security, so oversharing, performing access reviews, permission management, risk management, Copilot readiness, compliance topics, and then everything around costs. So that's the fourth pillar. So without further ado, I'll just show you how it actually looks so that you have a little bit of a feeling um, what Rencore governance is actually about. What I'm showing you now is the Rencore governance backend for an IT administrator. So it's a SaaS solution. It can also be self-hosted in your own Azure subscription, but usually the majority of our customers are on the SaaS solution. It's hosted in various data centers worldwide. And what it gives you here is, first of all, a high-level overview of what is currently happening in your tenant. And I'm now on a demo tenant, so there's not that much data here right now, but it shows you trends, what's currently happening, and where is movement around here. But the core part that I mentioned before already, and what you need to know, you need to get that transparency. What is actually in your tenant? So you need that inventory that gives you all that data, and it shows you, for example, the Copilot agent. So you see an agent here, you see how the amount of agents are changing. I will show you in a different environment with a little bit more data shortly, but you see, for example, okay, there's an agent, the onboarding body, and you can also visualize in Rencore governance how that agent is connected to other resources. So who has created that agent, the Entra ID app that is used, who's owning that agent, in which environment it runs, which knowledge it consumes, sorry. So for example, SharePoint sites, which might, for example, have a sensitivity label set. So you can also identify maybe critical information being consumed by an agent, which actions it's using, and also is that agent, for example, so are there conversations? These are currently anonymized, so you don't see who did that conversation. That's a setting in the Microsoft 365 tenant. And you see also, for example, there's knowledge from external sources, which is also a risk factor because the agent is exposed internally in your organization, and end users might not be aware that the data that the agent provides is not coming curated from internal sources. So it might be a public website which you have no control over and might be prone for prompt injection. Somebody hacks that site and puts something in there, plants maybe a bank account number, so that Copilot provides the wrong number, and suddenly you have a risk that you have no control. So identifying agents that use, for example, external sources is really an important part. So there are plenty of those objects, and I told you it's not just about agent governance, also about data governance. So similar, for example, you can go into SharePoint and you see the site collections, you see Rencore analyzes down to every individual file that is in any library in SharePoint and OneDrive, and you see who's created it, which SharePoint site it is. You see also the broken permissions, who has access to that, and. So all this information is in that inventory. And you can imagine this inventory like a big relationship model. So each of these entities, and there are much more than what you can see here. So you see, for example, there are also deleted users, there's sensitivity labels, there are the Copilot sessions. For example, a Copilot session, I'll open that in a new tab. You can see also where it happened, the studio pause, and you see the teams, the apps and the flows, the dashboards and the reports, data marts, data sets, and so on. SharePoint, as I mentioned, down to files, Engage, Entra, Enterprise Application Planner, and. So you see a lot of data. And I just mentioned Copilot sessions. So for example, here you see also in the Copilot session that this was a session in the biz chat. So it was Copilot chat, the free Copilot version, and the biz chat. Let's see if we can find another one. If this happened somewhere else, that was the web chat, similar like that. And you would see, for example, also, was it in Teams? Was it a SharePoint agent, and so on? So it gives you already insights. And what do you do with all that data? Well, first of all, you create reports, you generate insights. So you can see, for example, Copilot usage by application. So there is for maybe people who use the Microsoft 365 chat. Here they use Copilot, and I'll show you in another tenant with more data in a moment. Or you can also see, for example, costs. Let me just move over to the other tenant where we see a little bit more. So let's do Copilot sessions, reports here, and do, for example, pay-as-you-go cost analysis on Copilot. So you see in which environment, for example, or you could also say cost analysis over the last 30 days, the trend. Okay, there's currently nothing in here. Or for Copilot, you could see, for example, the costs broken down by department. If so, it takes the users with the license assignment and breaks them down by department. How does that actually work? So all these reports, they use the inventory. So if I see that report, I see here, for example, the users, and I see for the users, in this case, this is on the Copilot licenses, I see that SKU in my license, in my subscriptions. What is that actually? It's a query on that inventory. So it says, report me every user that has any subscription where the SKU is having Microsoft 365 Copilot. So this is now per user subscription. And you can filter that down. You can, for example, say, but give me only the users that are actually not enabled, where the accounts are disabled and they still have a Microsoft 365 Copilot license. And by that, you immediately identify maybe costs that you can save by quickly revoking that license and assigning it to someone else. So this is how reports work. So you let's just get one step further. You can then define how you break this down, how you visualize it, and you can build as many of these reports as you want. Rencore already provides a lot of these reports. So if I go inside here, you see there are loads and loads of reports already available in Rencore Governance, and each of those is basically just a template for such a query. And you can create your custom ones as well. Reports can be put on dashboards. So you can, for example, create a tenant overview dashboard, and it pulls reports, policies, and so on. And both reports and dashboards can be shown and shared also with people who do not necessarily have access to Rencore Governance. So you can create that visibility and update people on what is changing, how is the risk exposure changing, how are the costs changing, and so on, and what is violating maybe within your environment that needs to be handled. Moving further on, so this is just insights. This is just telling you what's going on. And you might have noticed in this environment, there's more than just Copilot and Copilot Studio. You see that we have also, for example, Anthropic, Gemini, Bedrock, Palantir AI, ServiceNow AI, and. So this is currently not yet available to our customers, only in private preview, but you see that this will go way beyond that, because we see a lot of organizations are adopting AI platforms that are not necessarily Microsoft. Also, not to bet all everything on one horse, or put all eggs into one basket. I don't know which analogy is the right one in English. But basically to have also leverage to allow one pricing changes to switch users over to a different platform. So we see that as an additional risk, because, well, if you maybe roll out Claude, it's still consuming data in your Microsoft 365 tenant. And of course, the problems, the challenges, the sprawl, the costs, and so on are not technology dependent. They are omnipresent, and no matter which service you are using. All right, moving on. What you need to actually get into control of that are policies. And a policy, you see now loads and loads of policies, but let's just take that one here for Copilot Studio. The policy is called unauthenticated public agent security risk. So there's an agent that has no authentication mode set. So basically anyone can access it, and it is published. That is the policy. And again, such a policy is again just a query on the data. So similar like the reports that you saw before, it's just a query, give me all Copilot agents that have the authentication mode equal none and is published and are published. And that's it. then Rencore Governance collects that data and continuously and updates. Oh, got locked out. Sorry about that. And updates that information for you. Once you have such a policy, so let's just pick another one, maybe storage usage. Once you have such a policy, for instance, a report, sorry about that. Let's take inactive Copilot licenses. Then you can add an automation to actually remediate that policy violation. So in this case, there's a recommended automation providing an approval process to remove that Copilot license. So I can just turn that one on if I like. I can also modify it to my needs. So if I go into that automation, you see, this is actually, we have our own automation builder where you see it's triggered by any user that is violating that policy that was set up. It sends an email to that user that they have used Copilot. Then it waits for 14 days, and then it asks for an approval. Let me see what no, it's actually condition. It checks again, has there been activity? When there was an activity, yes, then it just ends the workflow. So nothing has happened. But when after that email and 14 days of work, the user is still not using Copilot, then it asks for an approval of the manager of that user. So it connects to that manager and if they and ask that user if the license should be removed. And if the manager approves the license, the Copilot license is removed. When the manager declines, then the the user will get an email, hey, you can still have it. And if there's no response, in this case, there's also an automatic removal if the manager is just not doing it. So you see, by that way, you can automate that entire process. And how does the interaction look like for the end user? That is actually within Microsoft Teams. So Rencore provides a Microsoft Teams app, which is embedding in the rail here on the left side, and allows the end user to interact in those governance processes. So we just said that with a Copilot license, but that could be also a team, it could be an agent, it could be a Power App, it could be a flow. Doesn't really matter what kind of objects, they are all the same to Rencore governance. And you can get then an approval, for example. So the approval would appear here. Unfortunately, I have none. Or you can also set up reviews. So you can say, for example, in this case, this is for a team, you can set up a review on that specific component. In this case, who are the owners? You can remove them. Who are the members? Add and remove them. Maybe also change the role. You can visitors in the SharePoint side behind the team, if there's site access, SharePoint groups, if there are any broken permissions in there, you would see them here. And then you complete that review from an end user perspective directly in Teams. And then the actions are performed and audited, of course, what has done. You can even provide custom actions. So if, for example, the user realizes, hey, I actually don't need that resource, in that case, this team anymore, you can provide additional actions that trigger an automation, which can do anything you like, which can also, for example, connect to third-party systems. Similar, you can review manually. So if I am the owner of a workspace, I can also review manually what access is here and change that in a central place. And on purpose, we have built this entirely unbranded, so you can even remove the Rencore logo and change the logo and the name here to make it as frictionless as possible for the end users, because governance can only succeed if the end users don't really feel that this is a burden. It needs to be as simple as possible in the place where they are working anyway. So if they have a task that will show up in the activities, they click there, they give the approval, they are done. Right? So this is how Rencore governance works to enable end users. So there's much more to it, but I will stop here now. I think it gave you enough of an impression how Rencore governance works and how it can help you to not only manage and automate governance for agents, but also for the data that these agents rely on. With that, I'll go back to my slides. So we'll open up the floor for a couple of questions in a moment. But the one thing that I want to let you go with is don't leave here without a plan. You really have to ask yourself, okay, well, how many agents do I have at the moment in my tenant? If you don't have that, then you might have a problem. You really need to find answers to those questions. Who's accountable of those agents if you have them? And do those agents access sensitive data? If you don't know that, then you might need to want to look into it. Uh, yeah, the rot. How much is that rot feeding your AI system without anyone knowing? People are just using AI. They may be even happy with the AI, but are the decisions that they base on the responses, are they really valid? Are they really helping the business, or are they maybe even harming the business? So the rot, getting control of that rot in your data is super important. Yeah. And well, what happens to your rollout if there is that data exposure incident next quarter? What do you do with your rollout? Do you then suddenly stop using Copilot or using Agent? Do you roll everything back? I don't know. You should find the answers to that. And then the last question, well, can your governance actually keep pace with how quickly the agents are deployed and how quickly also the technology is evolving? So with these questions, I leave you to think about a little bit. Let's see if we have any questions from the participants. So feel free to send the questions in the comments. Unless so I can maybe call in Ella again. I think I don't have access directly to that.
Thank you,
Okay.
Matt. It was such an amazing and insightful conversation discussion. So let's look at some questions from the audience. How should organizations balance AI autonomy with human accountability when AI systems are making recommendations or decisions that impact customers, employees, or business outcomes?
Yeah, tough question. Let me just think about it. And well, I need to read it. It's a very long question. So yeah, I think some of the things I already addressed. So first of all, well, agents should have a named human owner, somebody who's really uh, in charge of it, and then maybe yeah, match that autonomy also to the blast radius that autonomy might have. So when something goes wrong, how bad can it go wrong? And can you actually reverse that? So if an agent is, for example, deleting users or revoking access and so on, it might be if they are deleting, actually destroying data or resources, and would be much harder to reverse that. So for these kind of agents, you want to have not just a human in the loop, you want a human or a people on the loop who really control that agent. You do not want to have it fully autonomously. When it's maybe with a little blast radius, so for example, data enrichment that could be maybe fully running autonomously, then it's a different topic. Then you maybe don't have that much of an issue, and the data that you are maybe enriching also maintains a history, so it's easy to reverse or relatively easy to reverse. So I think that's important to consider when you are trying to balance this autonomy and accountability. Um, Maybe one more thing also with the agents, that the decisions that the agents make have some kind of audit trail, so that you really know what has happened, what did the agent do, that you can really follow that up if something went wrong, that you are not in the blind, but actually have the ability to identify what went down and why did it go down. Hope that answers the question a little bit.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And what governance frameworks and policies are most effective for ensuring that AI tools are used ethically, securely, in compliance with evolving regulations?
Well, it's a tough one. I would say, well, frameworks. governance framework. So if you think about regulations, I think that is well, the regulations are only as good as the controls that you actually have implemented. So, for example, we have NIST or ISO 42001 or the EU AI Act that I mentioned before, or DORA, and so on. So there are plenty of regulations that are somehow around AI and touching AI and so on. But they are often more focused also on just responsible use and where's the data lying and so on. So this is um, you should use them really as controlled. So they need to be actively enforced, not just as a strategy that you have those. So I think the core part, what I mentioned also before, the first step, and this also goes in many of those regulations, EU AI or DORA or 2001. The first thing is that visibility. If you don't know what you know, if you don't know what you don't know, then it's very hard to measure, to enforce policy, to fix things, to identify gaps. So that visibility, the govern, you cannot govern what you cannot see. So that's the core part, I think, that goes along everything. And then that next layer is that ownership. So who actually owns it, who can change it, what that runtime enforcement, what can it do, how risky can it do? So the things that I mentioned in the earlier question as well. And then eventually comes down to those policies and how you enforce those policies. The policies themselves are pointless. You really need to have a plan how you can enforce them and enforce them also at scale. It does not work on a manual way. You cannot deal with that. The business will keep pushing to move faster and will make your life in IT a hell. So you need to find a way to automate that process and get everyone involved. And I think that is the only right approach how to apply a governance framework in your organization for AI. Hope
Thank
that
you.
makes
One
sense.
last question for you, Matt. Yes, it does. One last question. Well, as AI takes on more workforce tasks, what new skills, roles, and oversight responsibilities should leader invest in to ensure successful human AI collaboration?
Let's see. Yeah, I think that clear ownership that I already mentioned, that is like super important, and an accountable owner for each agent, but also a central function. Many of organizations now have a chief AI officer or a head of AI and so on. So who owns that operating model around AI, and then um, the actual owners of the individual agents to assign that ownership and have also a process how that is actually maintained, managed. And then um, I think what I see in many organizations now is to build some kind of an AI governance operator role. So people who run that inventory, who focus on that, who sits closer to the platform operations than to security, to really see that not as purely a security and risk topic, but rather like an enablement topic for the organization to make the organization more efficient, move faster, create better outcome, and so on. So more from an adoption and efficiency perspective, not from a security and risk perspective. For that, you have the security people in the organization usually that look at that closely. So, and that's what I think of a governance operator role. Then, of course, upskilling the workforce. Well, it's not just throwing it out and everyone is just here's Copilot, do something with it, and then people use it as a little bit better search engine. I see that in my organization as well. When I spend a lot of time myself in sitting down with people. Of course, we are not as large as a large enterprise, but sitting down with people and trying to understand what tasks they are doing and showing them ways how they can leverage AI to do those tasks. And some people lack the creativity on what they can actually accomplish with AI, and really make their life way more efficient and still do a lot of things like in a very old school way. So investing in that upskilling will have a payoff relatively soon. Because if you have a couple of those champions, then it will spread and they will show others, and others will become jealous. Why is that person so much faster in doing that stuff? Yeah, and then maybe um, two more parts that I see when I think about that. One of them, well, the cost and value oversight. So it's so easy to roll that out. It's so easy to swipe the credit card and have another Copilot license and have a build another agent and so on. And there's always a justification. There's always someone in business who will tell you a story why they need that. But really having that oversight throughout the life cycle, is it actually used? After maybe that adoption peak at the very beginning when it was introduced, how much does it fade down in usage? And is the cost model behind of it really in relation to that usage? Um, yeah, this oversight is super important. I mean, then lastly, of course, this whole judgment ethics around the usage of that and what exceptions are allowed. I think these things need to remain in the hands of the humans. So really to control what the AI is actually allowed to do. This is something that should not be passed on to an AI as well. I think that sums it a little bit up. So what I think where the investment would need to go in organizations, and what I see also with the organizations that I talk to.
Very well said. Thank you, Matt, for answering those questions. Before we wrap, register for the Microsoft 365 Community Conference happening May 4th through 6th in Las Vegas and save $500 with discount code A500. Check the link in the comments to register. We really appreciate you, especially Matt, for spending time with us. We hope today's session delivered meaningful insights and practical strategies you can put into actions right away. Bye.
Thank you very much.